Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever we happen to be finding you. As people join, I want to introduce myself and share a few announcements. I am Dr. Devora Newmark, co-founder of Home Ground Lab. The webinar will begin shortly. This webinar series is co-hosted by Clark University's Integration and Belonging Hub. We'd like to extend a very special thank you to Professor Anita Fabos, the co-convener of the Hub, for making this series possible. The webinar is being recorded. We will share the link afterwards, along with the link to the previous sessions. And so with that, it's my pleasure to hand over the speaking role to today's facilitator, my Home Ground Lab co-founder, Stephanie Acker. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Devora, and hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Beauty as Resistance, Art and Story as Healing Forces in Displacement. So I was thinking that it might actually be a bit off-brand for the topic of our webinar if I didn't start with a story. And so if it's okay with you, I wanted to do that so you had a sense of why are we here and who am I? And, on the role of art, so being an artist was the first thing I ever articulated that I wanted to be when I grew up. And I think it was just because I was good at coloring. But that was quickly replaced with what I really deeply wanted was to know that my life was making a difference in the world, and specifically for people who had to flee home. And I cared about that because a century ago, my family fled the Holocaust and they survived and got the chance to rebuild because one man deemed them as being worthy of being saved, but millions of others didn't have that chance. And that injustice has driven my life's work so that there's policies and systems so that anyone who has to flee their home has the chance to start again. And I think I just maybe assumed that being an artist would not be a part of accomplishing that goal. And so what I did instead was do all the things from all different angles on bigger and bigger scales. So I worked with refugees at a grassroots level. I worked for city government. I worked for US federal government. I've worked with and for universities, for a UN organization. And all I can tell you is that two things resulted from this. One is that I was really burnt out. And two is that maybe at best, if I'm honest, not like writing a resume honest, there was marginal change. And what this did is that it caused me to really slow down and ask, what actually makes a difference? And because I'm a community-based practitioner at my core and believe that lived experience has to be central, I started asking refugees and paying attention more to how they were surviving injustice and the lack of systems change. And what I noticed somehow for the first time was that they weren't sitting around waiting for systems to change, but they were actively rebuilding their lives and they were using beauty to do so. Planting, painting, gardening, creating, hanging. And this realization changed everything for me. So as Dr. Newmark and I have been collaborating, we have seen this pattern again and again in refugee-led communities, organizations, in research, in case studies, increasingly in the neuroscience. We see that beauty matters for rebuilding, for claiming hope, for taking up space. And this webinar is a chance to highlight that. This webinar series has looked at what the role is of beauty in displacement and humanitarian response. And today we're specifically looking at that, how it expresses itself in the form of art and storytelling. So there's three things we're hoping you leave with today. So the first is just to set a better sense of what do we mean by art and aesthetics? How does that show up? The second is that you have concrete examples, pictures immediately in your mind of what beauty in displacement context might look like. And three, we hope you leave with a sense of inspiration and some practical strategies for how you might incorporate this into your own work. So does that sound good to you? Because if so, let's get started. And what we're going to do today, we have three amazing speakers. We're going to start by zooming out to look at and lay a kind of theoretical foundation of what is aesthetics? Is it a plural, a singular? Why is it hard to say? And then really go down and hear some amazing examples of how this is being played out on the ground. So it's my pleasure to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Michael Spicher. Michael is a philosopher, a consultant, and the founder of the Aesthetics Research Lab. He works with people and consults with organizations to help them integrate aesthetics into their businesses, their decision making, their values, and design. He has spoken around the world on how aesthetics help us flourish, from events ranging from academic audiences to fashion and design. And he is based in Boston and teaches at many area colleges. So, Michael, over to you.
Well, thank you to Stephanie Devora for inviting me today. I actually had the privilege of meeting Stephanie at a local coffee shop this summer while she was in Boston. So it was nice to connect because a lot of times these days we connect with people mostly online. Um, I wanted to also begin with a story, one of my favorite stories from history. In 1944, Primo Levi was taken to uh, one of the worst places imaginable, Auschwitz. And one day, while he was with his group working, um, one of his fellow prisoners and he were tasked with going across the camp to get the food for that group. So they, of course, took the longest route possible to make it, as one would expect, to make it take as long. And Primo Levi began reciting the poetry of Dante, and his fellow prisoner immediately saw, or realized that he had never read Dante. So Primo Levi was even more excited to share this poetry with his fellow prisoner. He gets to a certain part, and he can't remember this connecting line. And so he goes back, tries again, still can't remember. And he then says something very, surprising. He says, I would have given up my daily food just to remember this connecting line. And you wonder, well, why would he have possibly done that? This is not like skipping breakfast and then feasting on lunch. This is it for the day. And they were already starving. And a few lines down in his book, If This Is a Man, he says, because for a few moments I forgot who I was and where I was. Uh, the power of aesthetic experience is not just for special moments, even though there are definitely some mountaintop moments we've all maybe experienced. It's not just for the elite, it's for people at every, it's for basically, it's for everyone, as my title said. So I wanted to, as Stephanie said, my training is in philosophy, and in philosophy, we have as many definitions of aesthetic experience as you have philosophers probably. But one that I particularly like is that aesthetic experience uh, has to do with sense perception. The Greek word aesthetics comes from sense perception. And so aesthetic experience is basically our response to our sense response to the world around us and how it affects us. And some have concluded that aesthetic experience is a basic human good, or as I've written here, a basic reason for action. It's not just a property. I mean, beauty is not just a property, it's a human value. And it's not just about survival, uh, it's about flourishing. Too many conversations with politics and so on just want survival. But we should want people to flourish. It makes all of us better. So if we're looking at aesthetic experience as a basic human good, you might wonder, well, how do you know? How do we know that this is actually something so fundamental? Um, well, unfortunately, there's not really a clear way of logically arguing the point where aesthetic experience, is the conclusion of this logical argument. What has been suggested by several philosophers is that what we should do is just look around us. I mean, I know that that sounds sort of silly, um, but look around us and what do people actually do, and what would life be like without it? So think about what people actually do. In our daily lives, people spend time, money, and energy grooming themselves to look a certain way. They decorate their homes, offices, whatever else they have control over in a particular way. I mean, it can obviously be used for bad purposes, but we do get a sense of who people are in some broad sense by what they look like, by how they present themselves, by you can see what people care about by what they fill their homes with. And then beyond our daily lives, we travel all around our cities, our states, our countries, the world to see things that we've been led to believe will give us some kind of aesthetic experience. Um, that may not be the only reason why we do these things. You may travel for you may be like have educational purposes or religious purposes, but clearly we travel because we want to see the magnificence of things, of mountains, of forests, of rivers, waterfalls, and other human-made objects and spaces like cathedrals or the Taj Mahal. So then we might consider the second question: what would life be like without all these positive aesthetic experiences? Well, we don't have to go very far to imagine this. There's one place that pretty much demonstrates it. Um, in a panel discussion, I saw Reginald Dwayne Betts, who is a poet and lawyer and was formerly incarcerated. The conversation that they had in this panel had nothing to do with directly with beauty, art, or aesthetics. But the first thing he said was, "There's no beauty in prison." Now, there's lots of problems with prison, especially in the U.S. But one is clearly that they're places devoid of aesthetics. And even some places, I remember visiting Alcatraz, which is now a museum instead of a prison, and hearing stories and reading stories about people that got to work in the garden, and they said for the first moment of being on Alcatraz, they felt like a human again. So we don't have to. I mean, and you can and just imagine, we don't have to like go to some extreme place like prison. Just imagine if you woke up tomorrow and all of the positive aesthetic experiences in your surroundings were gone. All the color, all the interesting shapes, all the different contrasts, everything was dull, boring, and dismal. You would not be able to thrive there. Um, so what does this mean? If aesthetic experience is in fact a basic human good, then it illustrates the fact that it's vital for our well-being wherever we are. In fact, in a conversation with a colleague, we kind of were talking about why do people neglect aesthetics so much or overlook it so much. And it's because it's like breathing or drinking water. You don't every breath you take, you don't think, "Wow, that's the most amazing breath ever." Wow, you don't think that way. But if you all of a sudden couldn't breathe, maybe you were underwater and you couldn't find the surface at first, and you were panicking. That first breath at that point probably would be amazing. So we often don't realize the negative impact that bad aesthetics is having on us at our jobs, at our, like we often, are trained to get used to it, and we shouldn't have to. We know that better aesthetics can, which is, now confirmed by science, psychology and neuroaesthetics, um, that better aesthetics can lower cortisol levels, and we know for sure that buildings affect our well-being. Now, one thing I want to say, especially in the context of our topic for today, is that the specifics of aesthetics will differ from place to place, and people working with different cultures need to be sensitive to the particular aesthetics of that culture, not impose their idea. And one way to think about this is one of the longest attributes or conditions of beauty, going all the way back 2,500 years ago to Plato, is proportion. Think about proportion. I mean, there's sometimes it's symmetry, sometimes it is just balance, and sometimes it's harmony, depending on the context. So, for example, a European cathedral is often very symmetrical if you look at it from a bird's eye view, whereas a Japanese rock garden is usually not symmetrical, but it has harmony and balance. So there's different ways to manifest these things in different cultures, and we need to be sensitive to that. But the bottom line that is absolutely cross-cultural is that aesthetics affect us. They can restore human dignity, and aesthetics can give us hope for the future. And that is why we can conclude that aesthetic experience is a basic human good that leads to our well-being and flourishing. And I'll end with one quote that I love by Ralph Waldo Emerson. "We fly to beauty as an asylum from the terrors of finite nature." He wrote this in his journals. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So great to hear, and thank you for taking us back in time a bit for something that I think philosophers have talked about aesthetics for, as you said, for thousands and thousands of years. So thank you for grounding us in that. It's my pleasure next to welcome our next speaker, Francisco Alcala Torreslanda, who is the executive director and co-founder of Home Storytellers. Francisco has a background in corporate leadership and documentary storytelling. Home Storytellers partners with refugee communities and marginalized communities to create films and campaigns that are hope-driven. Their newest film, We Name Ourselves, which we're going to hear about, explores how art becomes survival, how it brings dignity, connection, and hope, even in the harshest of conditions. Francisco, over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
So, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Stephanie, for having me here. I am really honored to be part of this panel today, representing the team behind We Name Ourselves. This documentary was filmed in the Dzaleka Refugee Camp in Malawi in partnership with a group of teenage poets who use spoken word to navigate their daily life in one of the most overcrowded and under-resourced camps in the world. Their voices are the center of the conversation that we're gonna have today. Let me begin by giving you some context. Dzaleka was built for about 10,000 people, and today it's hosting more than 55,000. As you can imagine, meeting basic needs is a daily challenge. Most families rely on food assistance that amounts to only a few dollars a month. Many people line up the night before distributions, keeping warm by small fires so they can secure a place in a really long queue. That gives you a sense of the pressure that surrounds everyday life there. Now, yet, in the middle of all of this reality, we found a remarkable creative movement about young people who were writing poetry, performing it, and teaching it to others. That contrast between harsh conditions and a vibrant creativity is what first revealed to us how art becomes a form of survival in Dzaleka. Now, let me share the trailer of the film.
The devil succeeds. Being white is not a problem. I can do it.
I run from poverty, but I am facing death surrounding me with anger. We are being given 5,000 for us to eat 5 months. Can we leave or stay? Was really not on my wishes.
First question, why are you a poet?
Without her, I couldn't be me. harsh, a sister, a mother, a family. Poetry became a therapy, a relief, and also a savior.
Refugee camps are full of snaps and hitches. We are the solution influencers and human rights claiming.
Sometimes we have that feeling of stopping and losing hope. Poetry is just like the way of breathing, healing words to people.
Alikuwa anamaanisha utakuwa mtu wa maana mu maisha, mwenye kufanya vya mkubwa.
And I, traveling to all the different places of my heart. This name, refugee, was not of my dreams. This name, refugee, was not of my wishes. Deep in me is the sorrowful song that I am singing and what I see.
Kuendelea na hii kazi bila kutia idea mnanimu kazi na kutabitafutia kitu.
Who sees my worth on this weird planet you call Earth? Is there any person that believes I deserve happiness?
Leo niko mbele, tuna my building tunaongea, ni kwa sababu tunayo mission moja kubwa sana ambayo tunataka tulete.
I need 1 second to breathe on earth. Tumaini!
So now that you have seen it, I would like to share some insights from our experience in Dzaleka. It became really clear to us that art is a strategy for survival, and as Michael said, is also a strategy for thriving. During our month in the camp, we understood that poetry was not an activity on the side or for these teenagers we filmed. It was what kept them steady. Let me give you one example. One morning we visited the food distribution area that you saw in the film. People had stayed outside to keep their place in line. A few hours later, we walked to the borrowed classroom where the poets met. The same teenagers who live with the same uncertainty were preparing to teach younger kids how to write and perform poetry. They did this this voluntarily 3 times a week. One of them told me that poetry was what allowed him to stay grounded after everything he had gone through. That moment showed us that artistic expression was not a luxury. It was an actual lifeline. We also learned the importance or validated the importance of hope-driven storytelling. We are careful not to reproduce narratives that reduce people to their suffering. The trauma is real, and we do not hide it in our films. But dignity, agency, and creativity are just as real. This helps audiences connect not through pity, but through recognition. They see young people who are leading, teaching, and imagining their future, even with a system that limits their possibilities. An authentic partnership begins with an understanding that the story belongs to the community. We spend time without the camera, explain our intentions, and invited the protagonist shape the direction of the film. Our reliance on interviews was very small. We followed them in the daily activities and in personal moments that bring authenticity to their story. This shared process is what makes the storytelling empowering rather than extractive. This story does not end when the film does. We are using the visibility of the film to bring attention to resources and resources to initiatives that will benefit the community, developed and implemented with grassroots and refugee-led organizations in Dzaleka. These include a national screening tour across Malawi to open dialogue on refugee policy, a virtual portal that connects the camp to a global network of educational and cultural partners, a science lab, a technology lab, an artistic expression lab, and the expansion of a library. The goal is simple. The film must contribute to create opportunities in livelihoods, education, mental health, and artistic expression. Let me conclude by saying that what we witness in Dzaleka shows that beauty can be a form of resistance, not because it hides hardship, but because it gives people a way to confront it, to stay connected to their identity, and to imagine a future beyond the limits imposed to them. Through poetry, these teenagers have created a space where memory, dignity, and hope can survive. That, to me, is the true power of art in displacement. Thank you very much. And here you have some ways to get in contact with us. And hopefully, if you want to learn more, you can visit us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco. It's so amazing to see how you are both highlighting the role of art in displacement contexts and also using an art form and storytelling to do that and to see narrative change. It is now my pleasure to welcome our third panelist, Juan Pablo Franco Jimenez, who works for the Bluemont Group as their country director in Colombia. And in this role, he leads programs that improve humanitarian assistance, self-reliance, durable solutions, and integration, both for migrants and for internally displaced individuals. Previously, he spent 7 years working with Colombia's government. He is an industrial engineer and political science by training and holds a summa cum laude master's in public affairs from Sciences Po in Paris. Juan Pablo, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon. It's great being here and sharing our experience, which is a bit more from a different perspective of implementing in communities here in Colombia. Just a quick context of Colombia. Colombia is a country that has faced a long armed conflict with over 10 million people affected by violence. That includes about 9 million people which have been displaced. And even despite a peace agreement signed 8 years ago, displacement is right now at the worst levels we've seen since that peace agreement was signed. At the same time, starting 2019, we've been receiving and hosting about 3 million Venezuelan migrants, which are fleeing their own situation from their country, pretty much as Colombians did back in the 1990s. So the work that Bluemont does here in Colombia has those sort of like two strands. One is the work that we do with communities and individuals affected by armed conflict and violence and displacement. And then also the work that we do with migrants from Venezuela and host communities. In fact, the work that we did together with Stephanie and Deora, and the reason why we connected and I am here today, started with the work that we do with migrants. And basically, our whole idea around migrants is that to promote social integration in between Venezuelan migrants and host communities, we needed to create an excuse for them to have more intense interactions. If they were living apart and seeing each other as the other in their communities, then there will never be any integration. So the excuse was simple. We're gonna help you refurbish your house, the house front, and paint it with the colors that you want and the symbols that you desire to use. And we did it for 100, 200 houses in the community. And by doing so, we created the interaction between everyone those living in the neighborhood, Venezuelans and Colombians, whoever they may be, to create more trust, So they started to get to know each other, to create more cooperation, so they would work together towards the goal of painting the houses of their neighborhoods or some community spaces. They would be they would use the solidarity that they had within them. Some people would help others paint their houses because there's some persons that couldn't do it on their own. And finally, they felt that they were integrated. There was a sense of community in which they felt that in this place, I can satisfy my basic needs, but not only that, I can have the influence over my day-to-day life in the community to belong here and have that emotional bond with the place where I live. So these are examples what you're looking at. These are examples of what color meant to these communities. You see that color, I wanna use these 4 photos to just provide some basic reflections on what we do. The first picture on the top left, you see that color people want it all over themselves. It doesn't matter if they ruin their jeans, they are happy with the color that they are wearing in their skin and in their jeans and in their clothes. They eventually can have not just the power to mix colors and start using them, but to use the paint rolls of the technique to change their own houses, as the photo at the bottom right, or even come up with very, in my opinion, because I'm an industrial engineer, very abstract representations of color, as the picture in the bottom left shows. So different uses of colors, of shapes, triangles, and whatever it may be. It's people that just did whatever they wanted to do with color, as long as it was something that they did together. And in fact, I bring one of the testimonies of the communities, a Colombian woman in Medellin. She told us, we are united, we feel harmony, and there's change in our neighborhood. And she's now saying that she's grateful for what they have learned from Venezuelan migrants. And they see each other as people who work hand in hand. Now, this is sort of like the most recent work that we have done around spaces and colors and transformations of communities. But we also had a long history of working with conflict-affected communities. But these interventions they had a different starting point. Armed conflict used spaces, and especially spaces of community life, to exert violent control over the life of communities. And some of the time, the effects of armed conflict could be seen in the built environment. The 2 pictures you see on top are from a community called La Mono. They had a massive displacement, and the town was left behind by pretty much everyone. It's a community of about 200 families. And at the end of the 1990s, they all had to flee. But they started slowly to return. In the house that you see almost about to come down because it's so old and it pretty much eaten away by the jungle in Caqueta, there was a lady that was living there because she had returned. But her house would never be the same as she had it before because of how it looked, and how it looked made her feel in a special way. But when she herself painted it with purple and painted the house fronts and the door, the top of the door with the paint rolls, it was different to her. One of the testimonies was seeing the people of this town united again for the same cause is beautiful. And seeing our houses painted gives us the motivation to return and reclaim the space we abandoned when armed conflict took over our homes. But there's another feature of spaces in armed conflict that we tackled, which is some spaces are linked to something that happened, which was an experience of terror, of how violence broke down the community. The picture you see in the bottom right is a very small room of a community center, which was taken over by paramilitaries. And the place where these people are crammed in and standing, it's the place where some people were tortured by paramilitaries. And what they are doing in that picture is they are working with us to come up with a way to start using this space differently. So they give a new meaning to this place, which was marked by terror. So how can these communities be so strong to face up with what happened in that space, to then be able to transform the meaning and the use of that room? At the end, this whole community center was torn down, and we built with them from scratch a new community center with a different layout, but kept two walls, two of those walls that you're seeing there, as an element that would help them remember what happened. And then the picture in the bottom left is from a school. So this school was, again, a rural school affected by armed conflict, the community. And this, what you're looking at, is the picture when they inaugurated what they called the Remembrance Hall of their school. It's a place where they wanted to remember what happened. And what happened in that enclosed space, which now you see with symbols, with a new floor, and inside they had small pieces of sort of like a museum curated type of objects of their community life. But what happened there was that their teacher was killed by the guerrilla right there in the school. And every single kid for the past 10 years that studied in that school had to pass every day by the corner of the school where one of the teachers, which was a community leader, got killed there. But again, what we help them do is to transform the meaning of those spaces so they can create another use of those for what they want. One of the things that we have also tried to work on is, okay, if this is the practice of what we've been able to do, how do we measure the outcomes of what we have? How do we measure this? So, because we believe that there's a connection, there's an association between aesthetics, emotional well-being, and integration. And this is because many times communities were telling us, because of the color, because of how things look right now in my neighborhood, I feel this. And those were emotions that were individual. I feel happy. But also there were emotions that were collective. We feel proud. We want to invite people to our neighborhood or to our town. So what we believe is that there is a connection between how the awareness of communities around their aesthetics, how they see colors, shapes, and movements, the effect that that awareness and those aesthetics have in how they feel, to eventually have an effect on how people relate to each other as communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Such clear examples that bring together so well what Michael and Francisco talked about. So I'm going to have all of our panelists join us, and we are going to kick off some discussion. And so I want to start actually in kind of a different order. I'm going to start actually by going to Francisco. So my question, Francisco, was what is the role of emotion in storytelling? And what role can that play, and where does that fall short and we need other type of change?
Yeah. I mean, when you are seeing a story, like a film, I mean, you are actually connecting with your logic, and and then you are also connecting with your emotions. And And what we do is is to actually bring the story of the people that we are working with in a way that we people are going to be connecting with their emotions, because the reason that we are doing this storytelling is twofold. Is because we want people to have perhaps a different perspective of what is going on around the world of refugees, and that hopefully helps to create a new narrative of the situation. And secondly, we want people to, if they can, to contribute to the benefit of the communities. So in both cases, it's important to touch the emotions of people, so they perhaps can open up to these new possibilities.
Thank you. So my next question, I want to go to Juan Pablo. So your work is really focused on a place and focused on community and practice, but you also work for a big organization that is kind of part of the larger response. And so I'm curious if you could talk to how you bring beauty, cultural identity, and belonging into systems that maybe are not built to hold that nuance. And what would it take to scale dignity-centered approaches like the ones that you are leading, without losing kind of the heart or the integrity that actually make them work?
Well, I think that there's one key feature of what we do, which is we work as locally as possible. So the interventions we do with migrants and host communities, they are at the neighborhood level. And there's a greater challenge for systems to adopt the practices that we've developed when you go very up in the system. So national agencies learning from these type of experiences and adopting them, we've been able to do so. In fact, the peace agreement included some features of what they called community rehabilitation, which was all which included the transformation of places of terror during armed conflict. But I think that the best progress you get is with local governments and when they take over these type of interventions. And they have sort of like, they can, because they are there, they can see what we believe is obvious, which is the change in everyday life of the communities. If you are a government official, as I used to be in Bogota, and you go to a neighborhood in a city like Cucuta, where I am today, you don't get to notice with the changes of communities. But if you are a government official of that municipality, then you can really tell what the change is meaning to these people. And we, in fact, were able to have some municipalities. We had one, Santander de Quilichao in Cauca, in which they took over this Casa Pintada methodology, the painted houses that I showed. And they even allocated part of their local funds. They were probably not that much when you hear the amount, which was about $50,000, but to them it was a lot of money because it's a very small local government. But they said, look, we want you to do what you do with the goal that we had for that intervention. But they said, at the same time, we can frame this as two different things. One is violence prevention, especially youth violence, which was absolutely logical because youth were getting into less criminal activities because they were busy with these community interventions. And they even framed it as public health interventions. And it was led by the health secretary, by the government secretary, and they eventually started to do it on their own. So there's a greater chance when you go local for the systems to be able to learn and see the benefit from this.
Thank you. So it's a really helpful segue. So I want to go to Michael, and one of my questions is, right, we hear these powerful examples of what aesthetics can do on the ground, right? When Juan Pablo says, yeah, if you're local, you can see the change in people, you can see the change in the community. And I heard someone say once, well, yeah, if we want this to happen in communities that have experienced trauma and injustice, it would be good if the rest of us also valued it. So I'm curious if you could talk to, when did we stop valuing aesthetics, and how could we not take it for granted like air and water, but have a greater appreciation? What do we need to do to have that more widely accepted just for everyone?
Well, one that I'm actually sure you're aware of just from other conversations we've had is I think the book The Abuse of Beauty by philosopher Arthur Danto kind of catalogs this really well. He's specifically talking about beauty, but he kind of it's sort of beauty was valued until the 20th century in different ways. I mean, we didn't always agree. What happened in, at least in the European context, is the two world wars. They thought, wow, we have truth. Right before they started, we have truth, we have justice, we have goodness, we have beauty, and then everything was destroyed. And um, artists like Max Ernst, right after World War I, said the work of this period wasn't designed to delight. It was of his work, not all the work, but was designed to make people scream. Right after World War II, abstract painter Barnett Newman said our goal was to destroy beauty. So I think that had a huge effect that rippled out worldwide on not necessarily every culture. I think, though, I also think the ways we frame things is a problem. Like I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't think it's a hierarchy. And maybe he didn't fully either. I don't. But the way people interpret that is, oh, okay, food, water, and shelter. That's what we need. Then some of this other stuff. Um, I think some of the philosophers like Martha Nussbaum with her capabilities approach, and this you don't have to worry about these names, but just and then the natural law philosophy that says aesthetic experience is a basic human good. They don't think there's a hierarchy among these things. They think, yes, obviously on a basic biological level, you need food and water to survive. Of course, but but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living, not just surviving. And um, so they don't actually see there being a hierarchy. If you basically neglect any of these things they believe, your life is less good than it could be. Doesn't mean, like, it's not to say that at every moment of the day you have to be following aesthetic experience or anything like, or any of these other things that different philosophers have listed over the years, but that if you completely neglect these throughout your life, and I think that's kind of how it is. And I can speak more to the US. We praised efficiency so much that we thought we didn't need these other things. Um, and it turns out that we're beginning to learn, even though we don't like to listen to the research most of the time, but we're beginning to learn that actually um, beauty and better aesthetics helps make people more productive in their work. We're beginning to see that happier workers actually do better work and are less depressed. I mean, even just like one simple statistic recently in Harvard Business Review said that 47% of people feel tired and depressed without access to natural light while they're at their jobs. So how much more does that affect us when in other situations throughout our entire lives? So I think I don't know.
That's really helpful. Francisco, I'll let you respond, but I'm going to throw out a question that I posed to all of you, and Francisco, if you want to answer it in whatever way you will. So I want to go to the title of our webinar, which was about beauty as resistance. And I've worked a lot on our communication, and I know that some people have reacted to, we have a storytelling series called The Beautiful Resistance, and some people have reacted like, wait, I thought these were like hopeful stories. Like, what resistance sounds negative. It sounds like pushing back or something. It sounds like what my preschooler does to me when he doesn't want to go to bed. So I'm curious if you guys could speak to, what does aesthetic resistance look like in practice? Why does it matter? And how might we understand beauty as a form of resistance? And does it change our approach to displacement, to humanitarian aid, to policy. So that is my question. We could each maybe take a little bit of a rapid fire, minute and a half, 2 minutes. And Francisco, I'll start with you since I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna react to what Michael was saying very quickly, because how natural can be that teenagers that are not representing an organization, but it's just come natural to them, can be using poetry, and not only using them for communicate themselves, but to teach it to other little kids. So to me, it's so natural to them. So it's not being fed by anything that is external. And in terms of resistance, I mean, we heard so many times from them, and actually the name of the film is We Name Ourselves, because they told us so many times, we don't want to be identified as refugees. We want to be identified by our name, by who we are as people. We are poets, we are change makers. So to us was so clear that poetry and art became a really strong form of resistance. And look where they are. They are in the film, and now they are going to be seen by the whole world.
Juan Pablo, you want to go next, or Michael?
Yep. I do have to say that I also interpreted the word resistance as a loaded word, especially because when we started to speak about it, it was a difficult time, and resistance was used differently in some arenas. But I think that the work that we've done, the easiest way to describe the potential of resistance and how beauty has that use is with places marked by terror. When people, I remember another place in Colombia, there was a health post which was used as a jail by an illegal armed group. And they painted sort of like a representation of, that an old woman is used to be in some cultures to represent death. And death with this huge thing, I don't know the name in English, to take people away. And these people painted it in the front wall of the health post. And they did it not because they were, or probably they were artists, but they used their art to exert violent control over the communities. And even when they left, and even when the health post was still being used to take care of people, they were afraid to paint over that lady, that death depiction. So it wasn't until we helped them with Casa Pintada and learn about color that they say we can paint over this representation. We were afraid, but now we are strong enough to change it. And that's how they resisted the past of terror that they had to go through.
Yeah, so resistance as a form of like, we're going to rename ourselves. We're going to take up space. We're going to write the narrative, very similar to what Francisco said. Michael.
I guess I have just two quick things. One is just sort of a interesting fact from the history of philosophy. One of the most negative European philosophers that people widely regard as the philosophy of pessimism is Arthur Schopenhauer. And he basically defined life as suffering. but he said, beauty and art are the only things that give us a moment's, rest from the suffering of life. So whether or not you accept his first statement he, in all of his negativity saw that. But the second thing I would want to say is, the world tries to beat out of us our longing for beauty, art, and creativity. I mean, just compare children's hospital waiting rooms with adult hospital waiting rooms. Children's hospitals are often brightly colored with all sorts of things, and then adult hospital waiting rooms are boring and oppressive. Like you feel like you're actually about to, like you're being processed to go to jail or something like that. The creativity is encouraged with young kids, and then it's just slowly, beaten out of you. So I think and there's even uh, some research, and I don't know. Research, I guess, is not. I don't know if that's the best word, but research now saying that in the 21st century, our creativity is flattened. Like there are very few. I mean, think what is the art movement right now? What is the music movement right now? Most people can't name these things. We've become so over, like money has driven these things. So I think acts of really powerful creativity and aesthetics are just inherently acts of rebellion right now, and resisting the way that life and society has tried to put everything in order for us. And so I think I don't know. I think we need more of it.
Those are great last words to end on, to resist however you are each feeling beaten down right now in life. So we are at time. We're a minute over. We have two amazing questions in the chat that I'm hoping we can answer a bit in our coffee chat. But I wanted to thank everyone. This is the conclusion of a 3-part series that we've done this fall. Thank you to Michael, Juan Pablo, Francisco, and to Devora Newmark for planning this amazing series. So have a great rest of your day, end of your day, or start of your day. Thank you, everyone.